Hello and welcome to the Unsung Sport Podcast, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the sports you love. Today we're talking about sports sponsorships with the founder of Synonymous, Daryl Fox. Daryl, thanks for coming on to the show.
Pleasure, Mark. I'm very impressed with how you, off the cuff, said exactly what the podcast does and how you do it. So no pressure on me now.
Good. Now, I don't mean to age you, actually, just to kick this off, but I do see that you've been in sports sponsorship for 20 years across commercial. Can you give us a very quick whistle-stop tour of what you've been focusing on in that time?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I was lucky enough to work in my passion of sport literally as soon as I left school, coming out of college. So I remember fondly. I would probably describe as pestering the commercial manager of Colchester United, a gentleman called John Schultz, for a good number of years. And he kept saying to me, when you're 16, come back and we'll have a conversation, which I did. Was fortunate enough to do 2 weeks work experience at Colchester, meeting some great people, which are pretty much all of them now I'm still in contact and friends with, and sort of learned from some people in their marketing team, from in their retail department and their commercial department as well. So did everything from selling the programs to the away fans, which no one else used to do, or half time, and I'd happily take the stick from people. So selling the programs, the old fashioned days of printed tickets as well before the technology came in. So I used to work in sort of pre-match ticket collection, and then progressed through and pretty much did a lot of the roles at Colchester, from retail, then progressing into the commercial team, and did the transition from the old stadium into the new. So did a good period of time at the JobSurf Community Stadium, which was really good. So sort of learnt a lot there, and then progressed to Essex Cricket Club. So was headhunted by a gentleman as well that I'm still really, really good friends with. So a gentleman called Danny, who was the commercial director at Essex at the time. So I came in to sort of spearhead their sort of sponsorship portfolio, look after the brands they had in place, but also to go out there and find new partners for them, but also oversee everything from sort of hospitality sales and revenue that came into the club. And was fortunate enough to do that for 10 years, made some great friends and some great contacts, and decided about sort of 2.5 years ago now that wanted to do my own thing, and just felt there was some things in the sports agency world that we could challenge and perhaps do a little bit better and put our own stamp upon things. So founded Synonymous, say 2.5 years ago now, and we're doing good at the moment. So long may that continue. So
Onwards and upwards, mate. And I mean, having that mix from football to cricket, how different? I mean, obviously the fan base is massively different. I'd assume, I'm not a cricket fan, but I'd assume that's a very different fan base. What was that like working with those two different sports?
brilliant. I mean, if I'm brutally honest, when I first joined Essex, I knew nothing about cricket. But that was a positive, because I had a good understanding of the commercial side of the game. When I left Essex, I absolutely love cricket, and I'm now a big cricket fan of T20 and internationals. So absolutely sort of love the sport. So I think one of the things when you're working in sports partnerships or working in sports commercial, you need to be focused on the commercial side of the business rather than what happens out on the pitch. So I think sometimes if you're not the expert in the sport itself, that's a good thing, because the expertise that the club requires is the commercial element of it. But you very quickly then get connected with the club, and you become part of it, and it becomes part of your life really, and part of your passion. So didn't find it too challenging. I had to very quickly learn cricket, because when we're having conversations with brands or existing brands, I needed to, certainly in the early stages, portray I had some clue of cricket. So again, some of the staff there used to rib me a little bit when I first joined, around some cricketing stories. I think I won't mention names, but there was a time in the office when they found it quite amusing that a former player that retired 10 years ago, they told me had signed, and I believed it for a period of time. So yeah, so no, it's important to have a knowledge of the sport you're working in, but actually it's the commercial side where the expertise lies.
Yeah, brilliant. And how do brands decide which sports or events to sponsor? I mean, what factors do they consider in that?
In general, or from my time at both sports clubs?
Just generally.
I suppose I can answer that from how we would help brands, and I suppose how we would recommend brands to look at the sports space. So sometimes brands can be led emotionally, so they would want to go into the sports space because they had an affiliation with a club or affiliation with the sport. So us as an agency, where we come in, is we want to help the brands from the start to the finish of their journey, really. So we would first of all try and sit down with a brand and first of all ask them, look, what's your objectives of working in sport? So what are you looking at the end of a sports partnership? What would you class as success? Once we've identified that with a brand, we then sort of go out to the market and research the opportunities for them based on their objectives. So if you took football as an example, Premier League football, one of the great things that Premier League football can do is give you global exposure across pretty much any country in the world. That's obviously only good for a certain brand. So if a brand is focused on UK eyeballs, then actually something like domestic cricket or county cricket would be a better fit for them, because they're not then investing in a particular sport that eyeballs are going to be over. So very much understand their objectives. We would then go out and research the market for them. We'd look to tailor a bespoke package to fit their needs. And I suppose one of our USPs is once the brands found that particular opportunity that works, we as an agency support them on the activation element of it as well, to make sure that the rights they've gone out to market with and the rights that they've got, we would support them to deliver that, to make sure that they achieve their objectives.
And I think the negotiation part of any sponsorship deal is we just don't see as a general fan. Can you walk us through the process of negotiating a sponsorship deal, like between a brand or a player?
Yeah, no, of course. So I suppose sport in a way is quite a unique proposition for a brand. So no sports sponsorship will be the same. So they're not off the shelf packages. So a sports club can deliver many different things to a brand, whether that would be brand exposure, client entertainment. It might be using the brand, might be using the club's database to engage with their supporters. It might be creating money can't buy experiences. So a few things we do with a few brands that we work with is that we're organising a six-a-side tournament on a Premier League pitch for them. It might well be we've done some stuff with a cruise line where we've got some cricketing legends on their cruise ship and done a cruise away. So everything's totally bespoke. So again, it goes back to what's the brand's objectives, and then it's negotiating the rights to make sure that delivers upon their objectives. Most sports clubs are really, really good to work with, and most of them again will work on those values to make sure that the rights that they give for the brand hits those objectives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do remember, and this is going back some, but I remember David Beckham advertising fish fingers, and I also remember an old advert where Muhammad Ali was advertising cockroach traps. Are players a lot more picky now? Because I think with social media and everything else, does the company need to align with the player and vice versa?
Massively, yeah. I think sports sponsorships have come a long way. So I think probably when I first joined the sports world, it was very much around advertising board around the pitch, bit of hospitality thrown in, an advert in the program, and sports clubs were probably in those days not too worried about what the brands were. It was about getting the deals in. Where I think now it's very much around alignment of the two brands, alignment of their values, alignment on their objectives. And likewise, the sports clubs have got some huge brands behind them as well. So they're only going to align with brands that fit their objectives at the same time as well. So there's definitely there's definitely more of that. And I think also when you're talking to people like David, let's just say David Beckham, not that I've been fortunate enough to, but if you're speaking to someone like that, some of the money that the sports players earn now, they don't need the sponsorship, perhaps what they may have done sort of 15 years ago. So they're doing it because they genuinely have a passion for that product, or they generally like it. There's a bit more meaning behind it nowadays, I think.
Yeah, and those I'm talking about players specifically now. Are there more opportunities, I think, to not just have a cash exchange, but also to get equity in a business and do other creative things around trying to, spread their wealth?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose a great example of that. Perhaps not directly in sport, but would be sort of the KSI and Prime sort of that sort of model. So absolutely, I think that sports stars now have got such a platform both on their social media, in terms of their media value, in terms of their money can't buy experiences, that there's definitely opportunities, I think, for sports individuals to build a brand or be part of that journey and be the face of it, if that makes sense. So you're right, there's a lot more that goes into these agreements now rather than just a cash handover. It could be an equity play, it could be a brand building play, or it might well be it's a charity angle built into it as well.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on the kind of KSI and the whole the sort of boxing. Do you see any other kind of untapped areas for sponsorship at the moment?
In terms of that's undervalued, or in terms of the
Yeah, I
brands
mean,
are.
for example, that celebrity boxing thing wasn't a thing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but it's huge. I mean, the Tyson versus Jake Paul fight is just going to generate huge sums of money in sponsorship. Do you think we'll see? I have to remember like the old celebrity football matches. Do you think there's something that could happen in football?
I think I think there's probably a huge opportunity in the women's game. I would say that's probably where there's still huge opportunities for brands to grow with it. And I think within the women's game, there's a great opportunity for brands to help join that journey and tell that story of why they're getting involved with it. So I would say that's probably the biggest opportunity for brands at the moment. And that's probably where we're certainly seeing with conversations that we're having or with the rights holders that there's so much elevation in the women's game across a variety of sports. That might be football, that might be cricket, that might be rugby. Um, but again, I remember from my time at Colchester, we had a few of the women's international football fixtures were held at the stadium. They're now filling out Wembley, so it just shows the growth that's had over the last sort of 5 years, and I think there's a huge amount of growth to come in that game.
And I mean, again, I've been to a couple of women's football games, and I do see that the numbers are just growing year on year and year. Is that one of those opportunities that you think is more domestic now, but will have that international reach, or are we already at that international stage with like a Chelsea women's, for example?
I think there's definitely the international route on there. I think the women's game is probably growing faster than the men's game. I think a lot like your men's football has got to a level it's got to get to, and I think the women's game is quickly catching that up. But yeah, so I think there's definitely international opportunities available in the women's game, but I think there's also huge domestic growth available in the women's game as well. So both, I would say, Mark.
How would a brand measure the success of a campaign? Like, and I know there may be different objectives as you kind of mentioned earlier. But what are the sort of typical metrics that are used?
So what we would always say to a brand is you need to measure a campaign based on your initial objectives that you set. So that might well be a brand awareness, for example. They might be looking at branding, and that's typically measured in media value. So when we talk about media value in partnerships, it's around how much value from the traditional forms of media. So that might be TV, social media, live TV, highlights TV. How much eyeballs is that delivering, and in what key territories is that delivering that for you? So that could be UK, that could be overseas, that could be in particular territories of the UK, and we report on that for a brand based on the value that media will deliver. It might be through lead generation, so that might be through using unique codes. So we work with some consumer brands who will track some of their partnerships by using unique discount codes that are relevant to that sports partnership, and they will track the return based on that. It may well be in terms of social impressions. So again, if a brand's objective is to build their brand digitally, they may look at that on the social engagement, on the impressions that they've got. Brands might track that on the impact on their communities. So sports clubs can also deliver some really good community initiatives for brands as well. So they might measure that on the impact that that's had on the local community or the certain area that they're looking to improve upon. So there's quite a few different metrics of how that could be done. It could be traditional ROI. We spent X, we expect it to generate XX from a partnership. So it goes back to that question, certainly when we're working with brands, is what does success look like for you after year one, year two, year three, and we'll report on those objectives. And every brand is different, I would say, and every brand objectives are different. So it's really important to understand what those brands' objectives are.
You touched upon earlier as well with it, like the advertising hoardings, or as you say, just sticking something in a program. But now the world's so digital. How has sponsorship evolved to adapt to these platforms? And is the digital reach sort of a bigger objective typically than match day?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think the sports clubs have got very, very smart and are very, very commercially switched on and are huge brands themselves now. So, what a sports club has got as a really envious asset to a lot of brands is they've got a huge amount of consumers coming to them, asking them to inform them regularly on ticket updates, signings, updates on the club. So a lot of the rights holders in the UK have got some significant databases now, so well in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in terms of their database. Exactly the same as social followings as well. If you look at some of the Premier League football clubs, for example, some of their social followings are absolutely staggering in terms of the numbers that they're achieving. So, absolutely, brands are wanting that sort of digital footprint. And I think sports rights holders are in a very unique place to be able to deliver that. So,
Yeah, you're right. These staggering numbers these days, and obviously they've got the rights to use a lot of that footage. So that we know that's. I guess they're the ultimate loyal customers because
yeah,
again, as a West Ham fan, as much as I get frustrated or get annoyed with them, I'm never going to leave them. I mean, it's just the ultimate customer, I guess.
absolutely. And especially in today's world as well. And certainly in sports that have got huge demand for tickets. So we saw, obviously, last year in the UK was the Ashes. I think it was something like 1.5 or 1.6 million people had applied for tickets for the Ashes. So that means that those clubs and those organisations have now got 1.6 million people going to them saying, please keep me informed with the games that are coming up. So, and that's just one example of one rights holder in the UK that they've got that coming to. And you've got NFL coming to the UK where there's huge interest. You've got MLB coming to the UK, which is huge interest. And the clubs are very, very good marketing brands now as well. So they're very good at building those databases and creating that demand and communicating really, really well with their fans as well.
Yeah, and for I guess not the Premier League clubs, but maybe the brands that want to partner with a content creator of any type. We are aware, obviously, there's a lot of fake followers bought and things like that online, which inflate numbers. Is that something like how do brands audit that and make sure that they're working with the right partner?
So I would say certainly if you're dealing with a club itself, the club have normally got very, very good sort of demographics and stats and be able to back those numbers up. They'll quite often work with an independent agency to be able to report that for them. Um, and similar to the sports stars themselves, if they're sort of competing at a certain level, they've normally got really good representation around them that will be able to deliver that in terms of who the demographics are of their followers, where their followers are based, etc., etc. So I would say that if a rights holder or a sports star is unable to provide you those stats, then it might not be the right partnership for you.
And we see obviously gaming is a huge front of shirt sponsorship, and the Premier League's going to lose that. I think it's next year, isn't it? Is this the last year or next year's the last year?
I think it might be. I think it might be next season, so 24-25 season. So I think you're right. I think it's one more Premier League season, but please don't quote me on that. I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's next year. Do you think that's? I mean, again, that's a huge investment to a lot of the Premier League clubs. Who do you think is going to come in and fill that void? Is there any particular sector that could step up and be the new front of shirt?
I think. I think in terms of front of shirt in the Premier League, it is quite a unique proposition because it needs to be a brand that is trading globally. To be honest, because if you're looking for an opportunity in the Premier League and you're looking for a front of shirt, a lot of your value is going to come from the global exposure you're going to get through TV and through obviously digital rights. So I think it needs to be tech brands is probably where you're going to see that growth. That might be tech brands that are looking for accelerated growth across multiple territories around the world. And I would challenge any of those brands to find a means to be able to communicate to, I think the Premier League, and again, please don't quote me on this, but I think the Premier League's viewing figures last season globally was about 2.4 billion. So I would struggle to find any other media or any other advertising method where you could pretty much instantly get your brand recognized by 2.4 billion people. So yeah, you need to be a brand that's going to be trading in a lot of countries globally to see the real value of a front of shirt sponsor of the Premier League.
I've no idea how much a front of shirt costs. Have you any idea in the Premier League?
It very much depends on the club and what rights that you're what you're looking to get, but you're going to be well into the seven figures of what you'd be expecting to pay to go into a front of shirt in the Premier League. But again, you then got to take into consideration, Mark, the media value and the eyeballs that's then going to see that pretty much instantly. And I think I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm going to pick a Premier League club and ask to see if you know who their front of shirt sponsor is. So perhaps, do you know who Fulham's front of shirt sponsor would be?
SBO Bet.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So,
and do you know, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say I cheat on that one because I was actually in the SBO Bet box at the weekend. They invited me because I watched a Tottenham game. So I was hoping you picked them. So I was a bit lucky. and what a win for Fulham as well. Brilliant result. So.
Fantastic. A good little plug for them as well.
Yeah, a good little plug for them. And have we seen the sponsorship spending reduce post-COVID, or because we've seen the transfers come down, but that might be more to financial fair play. But has the sponsorship come down, or is that still?
No, it's still very much on the upward direct. It's very much on the sort of upward trajectory. I think it goes back to, again, of there's probably not another right where if a brand wants to engage in sports partnerships, there's probably not many other opportunities globally or domestically that can offer media value, social exposure, the opportunity to communicate to the audience, to put something into the community, to entertain clients, to meet people. There's so many different rights that clubs and rights holders can deliver. It is quite a unique proposition. I suppose the one thing that doesn't change is the amount of rights holders that there are to partner with. And I think as it becomes easier for the rights holders to demonstrate the ROI through a lot of the digital stuff that they can deliver and trackable links, depending on the objective, it's easier for them to demonstrate the value. So I suppose 15 years ago, when you had an advert in the program and you had advertising boards around the pitch and some hospitality, there was a ceiling for that. Where actually nowadays, depending on those objectives, if the rights holders are delivering those, then brands are not going to be afraid to invest more or B, do more partnerships. But there's only that small portfolio of partnerships that are available across the UK and also globally as well.
Yeah, very high in demand, and we are seeing. Obviously, I don't think every club still has the smaller badge because you're allowed 3, I think, on a shirt. If I'm right, I think it's arm, bottom of the shirt, and front.
Yeah, so you can have front of the shirt, you can have the sleeve, and then you can have the back, but it can also be on the reverse as well. So I think it's 3 partners you can have in maximum, and they're all different in terms of, and that will be based on, again, the media value. The front's obviously the most prominent, and then it depends on brands' logos and propositions of what's the next best one.
Yeah, I suppose they're always going to need them because player wages are not going down either.
No.
Now, obviously, you're again, I'm assuming here, but I assume you're working with kind of larger sponsors. So this may be an unfair question, but if you're a non-league club, say with no TV rights and quite low attendances, how can they maximise opportunities for sponsorship? Because coaching a kids team, it's always a case of it's just somebody and it's a donation. It's not really a sponsorship. It's a donation because they have something to do with the club. But At what point is that scale tipping?
So I think if I was sort of in charge of a non-league club and I was tasked in terms of growing their commercial revenue, I think the first thing you need to do is just to come to terms with the fact that you're not going to be able to deliver the media value, the TV exposure. That's not what makes them unique. But I think where you can focus on is actually the impact that you as a club can have on your local community. So I think it's finding the brands that are actually looking for those objectives. So that might well be a UK based brand that covers the whole of the UK that has their head office in and around the local community that wants to put something back into the local community. I think a lot of these non-league clubs do have a really strong community behind them in terms of other businesses that are involved. So it gives a really good platform for local businesses to network with each other and local brand build and do the right thing. And again, I think if you're speaking to a lot of these non-league clubs, there's a huge amount of them that get involved in all aspects of their local community. So, some examples of what we used to do at the cricket club, we did some really good partnership work. Was we used to support the Chelmsford Food Bank, for example, and we used to engage our partners in helping us do that. And that might be through the logistics partner of the club who helped in terms of transportation, the facilities management company that engaged their staff to donate. So I think brands can utilize the club's community contacts and in terms of the work that they do. Um, they might want to use it as a staff engagement piece. So get all their staff to come to a match day, engage their staff. So I'd be focusing on community engagement, staff engagement, business networking, and making contacts and getting that community behind the brand, and the ability to tell that story about what you've done in the community. So if you are supporting that local non-league club with their community work, that's great content for the brand to be talking about organically on their social channels.
Yeah, I know that the likes of Dulwich Hamlet, that they do really well in terms of non-league. They get huge support. I know that it's maybe slightly more political as well in some of that, but they've got something that people really buy into, and I think
Yeah,
if you can find that, use that.
definitely, definitely. So and it's knowing your strengths and weaknesses. I would always say to a non-league club as well. So there's no point them trying to target the international brands that are sponsoring the Premier League clubs because they're not going to be able to deliver the value for them. Likewise, the Premier League clubs aren't going to be able to deliver the brands for the local companies that are based in Dulwich Hamlet that are looking to build and support their community because it's going to not be cost effective for them. So there's definitely a market out there for those non-league brands, and it's perhaps changing their model of not just an advertising board. It's about the impact that they can have and the brands can have in their community.
Yeah, and coming back to something you said at the very beginning there, it's all about the right objectives and I guess the right return on investment. That's kind of
Yeah,
the sweet spot, isn't it? If you can nail those two, then you're on a winner.
100%.
Great stuff. Look, before I let you go, Daryl, I definitely want to touch upon. Obviously, I was at the Fulham game as I mentioned earlier on Saturday. You were at Colchester United, which is
I
your local
was,
club.
yeah.
How was it?
It was a much needed point. Yeah, much needed point. So it's been a challenging season, but I think what's great, certainly at Culture at the moment, is there is that togetherness that we've now got the Cowley brothers in charge of the club, and you've got that togetherness from the chairman to the Cowley brothers to the fans, the supporters, and everyone there. There is that community spirit building at the club as well, which is great. So um, I very much hope, and I've got no doubt that they'll do what's needed to stay in the second division, and hopefully we'll be competing at the right end of the table come next season.
Yeah, it's just about staying there now. I agree. I think they've got some strong managers in. I mean, as a West Ham fan, I was hoping Matty Etherington to get a bit longer, but football's a tough business, so they've got some good managers there. So hopefully they'll stay up, and hopefully we'll grab a beer over there at some point as well.
Definitely, Mark. Yeah, definitely. And touch on that community part. It's great. I go with my family to the games, and we've got a great sort of group that we go with that are all sort of based in and around Colchester. So there's a real community sense there, and it's great for us as a business because we're networking with other brands, and we've got that great support group of some good friends that are part of that sort of consortium that go along to the game. So it's a really good place to watch football, and I would say to anyone in and around Essex and Colchester, come and support Colchester. They've got good facilities there and nice club and good people around it as well.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It would be, they must, if they were to go down, and hopefully that's not going to happen, they'd easily have the best stadium in the National League. I mean, that's a championship kind of level, touching championship level club, I would say, in terms of facilities.
Definitely, I've got every confidence that they will stay up. And if they don't stay up, I think they'd create the momentum of a really successful season in the National League. And I think it would also give them momentum to go through and potentially keep going as well. So I'm a big believer in sport that momentum can take you a long way as much as togetherness can. And I think you can definitely see that strengthening under the Cowleys at the moment. There is a real togetherness. I think they've had some challenges with the pitch, which they've been very public about. But I think the Monday before the game was called off, they had everyone from the chairman and his family to the staff of the club to the Cowley brothers were all out on the pitch, sort of coming together to try and get the game on, which is a good spirit that the club's got.
Yeah, definitely. They've adjusted the size now, haven't they? They've made it smaller to get into some of the problem areas. Yeah. Onwards and upwards.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, great stuff. Daryl, thank you very much for coming on and sharing this knowledge and wisdom with us. And thank you very much for being an unsung hero of sport.
Absolute pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to come and have a chat.
No worries.